What would you do if the person you trusted most in the world, the one you called your soulmate, harbored a secret so devastating it shattered your life within hours of saying, "I do"? For Olivia Harrison, a dedicated nurse with dreams of a bright future, her fairy tale wedding to Pastor Elijah Grant became a chilling nightmare. What began as a night of love and celebration ended with a single desperate act that no one saw coming. Elijah was admired by his congregation, a man of faith, integrity, and unwavering devotion. Olivia was loved by her colleagues, a woman of compassion and strength, ready to embark on a new chapter with the man she believed was perfect. Together, they appeared to have it all. But behind the vows and the smiles, there was a truth Elijah worked tirelessly to hide. On their wedding night, that truth came crashing down, turning a moment meant for intimacy into a confrontation that spiraled into unthinkable tragedy. How does a man so deeply respected commit such an act? Was it love, desperation, or the fear of losing everything? This is the story of secrets kept too long, emotions left unchecked, and a marriage that ended in unspeakable loss just hours after it began. Elijah Grant was a man who seemed to embody everything his congregation admired. At 38 years old, he stood tall in the pulpit of a thriving Houston church, delivering fiery sermons about morality, faith, and the virtues of patience. His words carried weight, not just because of their conviction, but because of the life he appeared to lead, one guided by a strict moral compass and an unshakable devotion to God. To his community, Elijah was not just a pastor, he was a role model, a beacon of what a godly man should be. But Elijah's life wasn't as pristine as it appeared. Raised in a deeply religious household, his parents demanded perfection in every aspect of his life. His father, a former preacher himself, instilled in Elijah the belief that his value as a man was tied to his moral purity and spiritual strength. His mother, equally devout, often reminded him that his purpose was to serve God and uphold the family's image of piety. Any deviation from this standard was seen as failure. Elijah carried this weight into his teenage years, where he discovered something he could never share with anyone. He struggled with erectile dysfunction. This condition, caused by a hormonal imbalance, became his most closely guarded secret. To Elijah, it wasn't just a medical issue, it was a personal failing, a test of faith he believed he had to overcome through prayer and devotion. He convinced himself that God would heal him when the time was right. And until then, he vowed to remain patient, waiting for the miracle he was certain would come. This secret shaped Elijah's life in ways that even he didn't fully realize. It influenced his sermons, particularly those about purity and the sanctity of marriage. His insistence on abstaining from intimacy before marriage was not just a religious principle, it was a shield, a way to avoid situations where his secret might be exposed. Over the years, this stance bolstered his reputation as a moral leader and gave him the time and space to hide his condition. On the other side of the story was Olivia Harrison, a 33-year-old nurse practitioner from Dallas, Texas. Olivia was a woman who had worked tirelessly to build a life of purpose and meaning. Born into a modest family, she was raised by parents who emphasized the importance of education and hard work. Her father was a factory worker, and her mother, a homemaker, devoted her life to raising Olivia and her siblings. When Olivia was just 16, her mother passed away after a long battle with cancer. This loss left an indelible mark on Olivia, shaping her into someone who deeply valued compassion, resilience, and the importance of family. Determined to honor her mother's memory, Olivia excelled academically, eventually becoming the first in her family to attend college. She earned her nursing degree and later specialized as a nurse practitioner, a career she loved for its balance of technical skill and emotional connection with patients. Those who worked alongside her often described Olivia as warm, patient, and deeply empathetic. But behind her professional success was a longing for something more, a partner who shared her faith and her vision for a fulfilling, God-centered life. Elijah and Olivia's paths crossed at a regional church conference. For Olivia, it was an unexpected encounter that felt like divine intervention. She was immediately drawn to Elijah's charisma, the way he spoke about faith with such passion and conviction. To Elijah, Olivia was a revelation. Her intelligence and kindness stood out, but it was her unwavering faith and dedication to her career that truly captivated him. She was everything he had prayed for, someone strong, compassionate, and equally committed to living a life of purpose. Their connection was instant, and their relationship blossomed quickly. Within weeks, they were sharing long conversations over coffee, discussing scripture, and dreaming of a future together. Elijah admired Olivia's ability to balance her demanding career with her spiritual life, while Olivia was inspired by Elijah's steadfast commitment to his faith. Their courtship was marked by shared prayers, heartfelt dinners, and moments that seemed to affirm their belief that God had brought them together. But there were cracks in the foundation of their whirlwind romance. While Olivia entered the relationship with an open heart and a strong sense of trust, Elijah carried the weight of his secret. His insistence on waiting until marriage for intimacy resonated with Olivia, who respected his commitment to his principles. Yet for Elijah, this was more than a principle, it was a necessity. He relied on their shared faith and Olivia's understanding nature to keep his secret buried, telling himself that their love would endure any challenge. Their engagement came quickly, surprising some of their friends and family. But to those who knew them, Elijah and Olivia seemed like the perfect match, a union blessed by God and destined for greatness. The wedding was planned with the same intensity as their relationship, a celebration of love and faith that brought together their families, friends, and congregation. The day had finally come, a day Elijah and Olivia had prayed for, planned for, and dreamed about. Their wedding was nothing short of spectacular, a grand celebration of love and faith that brought together family, friends, and members of Elijah's congregation. The church was adorned with white lilies and gold accents, symbolic of purity and devotion. Sunlight poured through the stained glass windows, casting vibrant colors across the pews as the guests took their seats. Elijah, dressed in a tailored black suit, stood at the altar, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. His smile was warm but restrained, his movements deliberate, as though every step he took carried the weight of his secret. He glanced briefly at the crowd, catching the proud gaze of his father in the front row, before fixing his eyes on the doors at the back of the church. When Olivia appeared, the room collectively held its breath. She was radiant, her ivory gown shimmering under the sunlight as she walked down the aisle. Her father, holding her arm, wore a wide smile, his pride evident. As she reached Elijah, her smile grew, a mixture of joy, love, and anticipation for the life they were about to begin together. The ceremony was a blend of tradition and personal touches. Elijah delivered heartfelt vows, his voice steady as he spoke about love, faith, and the future they would build together. Olivia's vows were equally moving, emphasizing trust and partnership, two values she held dear. As they exchanged rings, the congregation erupted in applause, celebrating a union that seemed destined to inspire those around them. The reception that followed was equally extravagant. Held in a grand banquet hall, it featured crystal chandeliers, elegant floral arrangements, and a live gospel choir that filled the room with soulful melodies. Guests dined on a lavish spread of Southern cuisine, raising their glasses in toast after toast to the happy couple. Olivia's laughter rang out as she danced with her friends and family, while Elijah moved through the room, thanking guests and offering his signature calm, reassuring presence. Yet beneath his composed exterior, Elijah felt a gnawing unease. The day had been perfect, but the night loomed ahead. He reminded himself of his faith, of his belief that God would intervene, but a small part of him couldn't ignore the doubt creeping in. Still, he smiled, shook hands, and made his way back to Olivia, who was glowing with happiness. As the evening wound down, the couple said their goodbyes and slipped into the awaiting limousine that would take them to their honeymoon suite. Guests waved and cheered as the car pulled away, oblivious to the tension simmering beneath Elijah's calm demeanor. The honeymoon suite was a vision of romance. Flickering candles cast a warm glow over the room, their soft light reflecting off the champagne glasses set neatly on the table. A plush king-sized bed was adorned with rose petals, and the faint hum of classical music played in the background. Olivia took in the scene with a wide smile, her excitement palpable. She kicked off her shoes and laughed as she poured 2 glasses of champagne, handing one to Elijah. "To us," she said, raising her glass. Elijah hesitated for a moment before clinking his glass against hers. "To us," he replied, his voice quieter than usual. Olivia didn't notice his reluctance at first. She was caught up in the magic of the moment, the culmination of months of planning and years of dreaming. She moved closer to him, resting her head on his shoulder, and whispered, "I've waited for this moment for so long." Elijah's smile faltered, but he quickly masked it, setting his glass down and wrapping an arm around her. "Me too," he said, though the words felt heavy in his mouth. As the evening progressed, Olivia took the lead, eager to share this intimate moment with the man she loved. She reached for his hand, guiding him toward the bed. The warmth in her touch was undeniable, her excitement infectious. Elijah followed her movements but grew increasingly tense, his body stiffening as they settled onto the bed. Sensing his hesitation, Olivia paused. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft and reassuring. Elijah nodded quickly, avoiding her gaze. "I'm fine. It's just a lot to take in." She smiled, brushing a hand against his cheek. "It's just us now. There's nothing to be nervous about." Her words, though meant to comfort, only deepened his anxiety. As Olivia leaned in, her touch gentle and inviting, Elijah froze. He couldn't bring himself to respond, his body betraying him in the most critical moment. Olivia pulled back slightly, a look of confusion crossing her face. "Elijah," she said carefully, "what's wrong?" He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Olivia waited, her concern growing with each passing second. Finally, she placed her hands on his shoulders and said, "Talk to me." Tears welled in Elijah's eyes as the weight of his secret became too much to bear. His voice cracked as he finally confessed, "I can't. I've struggled with this for years. It's a condition. I prayed, I thought it would be different tonight." Olivia stared at him, trying to process what she had just heard. "You knew?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You knew this whole time?" Elijah nodded, his tears now falling freely. "I didn't know how to tell you. I thought God would heal me. I thought our love would be enough." Her initial shock gave way to anger. She pulled back, standing up from the bed and crossing her arms. "You lied to me," she said, her voice trembling. "You let me believe. You made me think this was something it's not." Elijah tried to reach for her, but she stepped back. "Olivia, please. I didn't mean to hurt you. I was afraid." "Afraid?" she repeated, her anger now overtaking her sadness. "You built this entire marriage on a lie, Elijah. How can I trust anything you've said? How can I believe in anything we've built?" She shook her head, her voice now cooled. "I can't do this. I deserve someone who can be honest with me. I want out." The atmosphere in the honeymoon suite had shifted dramatically. The warmth of candlelight now seemed cold and uninviting, and the faint hum of music in the background only accentuated the silence that hung between them. Olivia stood with her arms crossed, her tears streaking her flawless makeup. Her chest heaved with emotion, her mind racing as she tried to process the betrayal she had just uncovered. Elijah sat on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands, trembling. He couldn't bring himself to look at her, couldn't face the disappointment and anger in her eyes. He had spent years building walls of faith and reputation around his secret, walls that now lay in ruins. The weight of her words, "I want out," crushed him. "Olivia, please," he began, his voice cracking. He stood slowly, his hands outstretched in a desperate plea. "I know I hurt you, but we can get through this. I love you. I've always loved you." Olivia turned to face him, her expression hardened by anger. "Love," she said, her tone sharp. "Love is built on trust, Elijah. How can you say you love me when you've lied to me from the start?" Elijah took a step closer, his voice trembling with urgency. "I was scared, Olivia. Scared of losing you. Scared of what you would think of me if you knew the truth." Her voice rose, laced with frustration. "And now you've lost me anyway. You didn't give me a choice, Elijah. You let me believe in a future that was never real." The words struck him like a physical blow. Elijah's breath quickened, his emotions spiraling out of control. He felt the walls closing in, the weight of shame, fear, and heartbreak pressing down on him. He reached for her again, his voice trembling. "Don't say that. Please don't leave me. We can fix this." Olivia shook her head, taking a step back. "There's nothing to fix. I can't stay in a marriage built on lies. I deserve better." Her words, though truthful, felt like daggers. Elijah's chest tightened as panic overtook him. He saw his entire life unraveling before his eyes. The love of his wife, the respect of his congregation, the image he had worked so hard to uphold. He couldn't let it all fall apart. He wouldn't. "Stop," Elijah shouted, his voice raw with desperation. "You don't mean that. You can't just throw this away." Olivia raised her hands defensively. "Elijah, calm down. You're scaring me." But he wasn't listening anymore. The fear, the shame, the crushing weight of losing everything, he couldn't think past it. Without realizing what he was doing, Elijah lunged forward, his hands grasping her arms. "Don't leave me," he shouted, his voice cracking. "We can fix this. You can't leave me." "Let go of me," Olivia cried, struggling against his grip. "Elijah, stop." In that moment, his hands moved to her neck. He didn't intend to hurt her. At least, that's what he would tell himself later. He just wanted her to stop, to listen, to understand. But his grip tightened as she tried to pull away, her nails clawing at his hands in a desperate attempt to free herself. "Elijah," she gasped, her voice strained. "You're hurting me." But he couldn't hear her over the deafening roar of his own thoughts. His vision blurred, his emotions drowning out reason. He pressed harder, tears streaming down his face as he begged, "Don't leave me, Olivia. Please don't leave me." And then, it happened. Her body went limp in his hands, her arms fell to her sides, her head tilting slightly. The fight was gone. The room fell silent. Elijah froze, his hands still around her neck. Slowly, the reality of what he had done began to sink in. He released her and stumbled backward, his heart pounding in his chest. "Olivia?" he whispered, his voice shaking. "Olivia, wake up." He dropped to his knees beside her, shaking her gently. "Please," he begged, "please wake up. I didn't mean to. I didn't." His words dissolved into sobs as he tried to rouse her, but there was no response. Panicking, he placed his ear to her chest, searching for a heartbeat, but the silence was deafening. He felt for a pulse on her wrist, then her neck, but there was nothing. The realization hit him like a freight train. She wasn't breathing. Olivia was gone. "No." Elijah screamed, his voice echoing through the suite. He staggered to his feet, grabbing his phone with trembling hands. Dialing 911, he pressed the phone to his ear, his voice frantic. "Please, my wife isn't breathing. Send help. Please hurry." The operator's voice tried to calm him, but he couldn't focus. He dropped the phone and fell to his knees beside Olivia again, sobbing uncontrollably. "I'm sorry," he whispered through his tears. "I'm so sorry." Minutes felt like hours as he knelt there, his mind racing with panic and regret. When the paramedics arrived, Elijah scrambled to the door, his face streaked with tears. "Please help her," he cried, leading them to Olivia's lifeless body. The paramedics worked quickly, but their faces grew grim as they examined her. One of them turned to Elijah, shaking their head. "I'm sorry," they said. "She's gone." Elijah collapsed into a chair, his body shaking with uncontrollable sobs. He buried his face in his hands, the weight of what he had done crushing him. He didn't argue, didn't protest. He knew there was nothing left to say. The room that had been filled with love and anticipation just hours earlier was now silent, save for the sound of Elijah's broken cries. His world, once so carefully constructed, had crumbled in an instant. The next steps would not be his to decide. The authorities were already on their way, and the truth would soon come to light. The arrival of law enforcement at the scene marked the beginning of an investigation that would unravel a night filled with sorrow and secrets. The honeymoon suite, once the setting of love and celebration, was now a crime scene. Two officers entered the room, their faces somber as they observed Elijah sitting motionless in the corner, his hands trembling and his face streaked with tears. Paramedics had already pronounced Olivia dead, her lifeless body resting on the bed. When questioned, Elijah recounted a version of events that cast the tragedy as an unfortunate accident. His voice was shaky, his words carefully chosen. "We were arguing," he said, his eyes darting nervously. "She got upset. She fainted. I didn't know what to do. I called for help as soon as I could." The officers jotted down his statement, but exchanged subtle glances. While Elijah's demeanor reflected grief and despair, there were elements of the scene that raised immediate questions. The bed was disheveled, but not in a way consistent with a medical emergency. The faint marks visible on Olivia's neck hinted at something far more sinister than a simple fainting spell. Still, without definitive proof, the authorities filed the incident as a possible medical emergency pending further investigation. The following day, Olivia's body was transported to the county medical examiner's office for an autopsy. Dr. Rachel Monroe, a seasoned forensic pathologist, began her examination with meticulous care. Initial observations confirmed the officer's suspicions. There were bruises around Olivia's neck, faint but unmistakable, indicative of strangulation. Further analysis revealed petechial hemorrhages in her eyes, a telltale sign of asphyxiation. These findings ruled out a natural cause of death, shifting the case from a tragic accident to a potential homicide. Dr. Monroe's report detailed the evidence, and with the medical examiner's conclusion in hand, detectives began piecing together the events of the night. They revisited the honeymoon suite, this time with a forensic team in tow. Fingerprint analysis was conducted on every surface, including Olivia's neck, where distinct impressions matching Elijah's hands were discovered. Meanwhile, detectives interviewed staff and guests at the hotel, seeking witnesses who might provide further insight. A couple staying in the room next door recalled hearing raised voices late in the evening. "We heard a man yelling," one of them said. "He sounded angry, desperate even. Then there was silence. We thought it was just a marital spat." Hotel staff, too, provided valuable details. The concierge on duty mentioned seeing Elijah earlier in the evening. "He seemed nervous," the concierge recalled, kept pacing in the lobby before heading back to his room. The combination of witness accounts and forensic evidence painted a troubling picture. With the investigation gaining momentum, detectives turned their attention to Elijah. Over the next week, they pieced together a timeline of events that led to Olivia's death. Each piece of evidence, from the bruises on her neck to the reports of arguing, pointed back to Elijah as the primary suspect. 1 week after Olivia's death, the police arrived at Elijah's church, where he was preparing for Sunday service. The congregation, unaware of the events that had transpired, greeted him warmly. Elijah attempted to mask his unease, but his composure faltered when he saw the officers enter the sanctuary. "Pastor Elijah Grant," one of the detectives announced, "you're under arrest for the suspected murder of Olivia Grant." Gasps filled the room as members of the congregation watched their beloved pastor being handcuffed and escorted out of the church. Elijah's face was pale, his body trembling as he muttered prayers under his breath. He did not resist, walking silently to the patrol car as cameras from local news stations captured the shocking scene. At the station, Elijah was placed in an interrogation room. The once confident pastor now appeared defeated, his shoulders slumped and his hands clasped tightly together. Detectives presented the evidence detailing the bruises on Olivia's neck, the fingerprints, and the witness accounts. At first, Elijah maintained his earlier claim. "It was an accident," he insisted, his voice barely audible. "She fainted. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." But as the interrogation continued, the pressure mounted. The detectives pressed him, their questions relentless. "Elijah, the evidence doesn't lie," one of them said. "You were the only person in that room. Her injuries tell us exactly what happened." Elijah's resolve crumbled. Tears streamed down his face as he buried his head in his hands. "I didn't mean to hurt her," he sobbed. I couldn't let her leave. She said she wanted out. I couldn't lose her. I didn't know what I was doing. It just happened." The room fell silent as Elijah's confession sank in. His voice, once so commanding in the pulpit, was now broken and fragile. He spoke haltingly, recounting the events of that night, the argument, the panic, the moment he lost control. "I just wanted her to stay," he whispered. "I loved her." With his confession recorded, the investigation reached its conclusion. Elijah Grant, the man revered by his community as a beacon of faith and morality, had admitted to ending the life of the woman he claimed to love. The case that had begun as a possible accident had now taken a devastating turn, leaving both the investigators and the community grappling with the enormity of the tragedy. The trial of Elijah Grant drew widespread attention, with the courtroom packed daily. The prosecution presented a compelling argument, framing Elijah as a man who valued his public image more than his wife's life. Prosecutor Daniel McAllister declared, "This was not a tragic accident. It was a deliberate act fueled by pride and desperation." The medical examiner testified about the bruises on Olivia's neck, consistent with strangulation. Witnesses recounted the argument overheard in the hotel and Elijah's anxious behavior that night. Each piece of evidence reinforced the narrative of a man who couldn't face public shame. The defense, however, argued Elijah's actions stemmed from a moment of emotional weakness rather than intent. Defense attorney Monica Reed told the jury, "Elijah Grant is not a murderer. He is a man who made a terrible mistake under unimaginable emotional strain." Character witnesses spoke of his devotion to faith and his community, painting a picture of a man whose actions were entirely out of character. As the trial reached its conclusion, both sides delivered passionate closing arguments. The prosecution focused on justice for Olivia, while the defense pleaded for understanding and compassion. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. The judge sentenced Elijah to 25 years in prison, noting the tragic loss his actions caused. For Olivia's family, the verdict provided some closure, but it could never bring her back. And for Elijah, the weight of his choices would follow him for the rest of his life. The aftermath of Elijah Grant's trial left an indelible mark on the community he once led. His congregation, who had looked to him as a moral leader, were stunned by the revelations of his actions. Some members mourned the loss of Olivia, a woman who had become beloved in her short time among them. Others struggled to reconcile their image of Elijah, a man they believed was guided by faith and integrity, with the reality of his crime. Whispers of disbelief filled the church halls, and attendance dwindled as the weight of the scandal took its toll. For many, the shock wasn't just about the crime itself, but the layers of deception that had preceded it. How could a man who preached patience and truth be capable of such a devastating act? The betrayal ran deep, leaving the congregation divided and fractured. For Olivia's family, the grief was immeasurable. They remembered her as a compassionate and ambitious woman whose life had been stolen far too soon. While the trial provided a measure of justice, it couldn't heal the pain of losing a daughter, sister, and friend. Their mourning served as a painful reminder of the cost of secrets and unresolved fears. Beyond the individuals involved, this tragedy raised broader questions about the dangers of unchecked insecurities and the pressure to maintain appearances. Elijah's fear of vulnerability and his reliance on faith as a shield from his struggles ultimately led to an irreversible decision. Was his desperation understandable, or was it a reflection of deeper flaws in his character? Could honesty, though difficult, have spared both of them this tragic outcome? This story leaves us with a sobering truth. Deception, no matter how well-intentioned, can have devastating consequences. The pursuit of perfection, when rooted in fear, can unravel even the strongest bonds. Olivia's death serves as a stark reminder that honesty, though uncomfortable, is often the only path to true connection and healing. What do you think? Could this tragedy have been avoided if Elijah had been honest from the start? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more cases that explore the complexities of human nature. Stay safe, and remember, truth is often the strongest foundation for any relationship.